Has God ever said no to you? Contrary to what some people may teach, God does not give you everything you ask for. Sometimes He says no. Then the question can be asked, is no a negative? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10 help you and me understand why sometimes the answer God gives is no. The Apostle Paul was one of the great apostles of the first century. If you know much about his history, you know that he was trained by one of the leading rabbis of his day. He was instrumental in starting a lot of churches, and God used Paul to write over half of the New Testament. But Paul had a lot of difficult days in his life also. He probably asked God to stop some things from happening to him, and God's answer was no. For instance, 5 times Paul was beaten with 39 stripes. He was beaten with rods 3 times. He was stoned and left for dead once. He was shipwrecked. The list just goes on. Don't you think that Paul asked God to stop those things from happening? But God didn't stop them. Paul had such a good relationship with Jesus that 2 Corinthians 12 tells us he was caught up to the 3rd heaven, paradise, we call it heaven, and heard things he was not allowed to share. But in this same chapter where he's talking about being caught up to the 3rd heaven, he tells us that because of the number of revelations he had, there was given to him a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet or harass him. Why? Well, Paul gives us the answer. It was to keep him from becoming arrogant or conceited. We don't know what the thorn in the flesh was. Some people speculate, but they don't really know. What we do know is that Paul prayed for it to be taken away 3 times, and God said no. The thorn in the flesh helped keep Paul humble. Notice what Jesus said to Paul. Jesus said, after Paul asked him to remove the thorn, and God said no, Jesus replied to Paul saying, "My grace is sufficient for you." But he didn't stop there. Jesus went on to say, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Paul's response gives us insight into how he was so greatly used of God. He said that rather than glory in the revelations God had given him, he would rather glory in his infirmities or those weaknesses. Then he tells us why. He said, "So that the power of Christ may rest upon me." In other words, Paul realized that remembering his weaknesses helped keep him from exalting himself. And when he remained dependent upon Christ instead of self, that was when the power of Christ would rest upon him. When God says no to you, it does not have to be a negative in your life. If you will accept the no and be thankful for your weaknesses that remind you of your dependency on God, it can result in the positive of the power of Christ resting upon you. When that is the case, you will accomplish much more for God than you ever could by being arrogant and self-sufficient. The no may be because God is working something out for your good. So when God says no, thank Him. You'll understand it better by and by. Be blessed.